Teach me something, Uncle Money.
How you guys doing today? We have another episode of Practice Prosperity. We're joined today by Dr. Shauna Pollard. She is going to explain her practice, who she serves, and I think she's going to share some nuggets on her experience through college and how she's leveraging that today in her career. So welcome today.
Thank you. It's good to be here, Randall.
Awesome. So can you please tell me a little bit about your firm and the populations that you serve?
Sure. So I'm a licensed psychologist. I'm in Atlanta. I'm licensed in Maryland and the state of Georgia. I used to live in Maryland. And so I have clients in both of those states, but because I have something called a SIPAC, which is an interjurisdictional compact, I see folks all over the country. So my practice does a lot of things. So I do individual therapy. I also do consulting. I do some coaching of so far, it's been BIPOC entrepreneurs, some folks in healthcare as well. I also run a group for BIPOC clinicians, and I also have added in an event called BIPOC Notes and Networking. So I basically serve ADHDers, professionals who are doing well in their careers, but running into challenges that come with moving onward and upward, and who navigate that intersectionality between being high achieving, but also having areas of weakness, areas of struggle, and just need someone else to help them sort through the challenges that they're facing, to put it succinctly.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when folks go to college, they don't realize there is a glass ceiling. And there's some things you have to do differently that they don't explain in college. One assumes I sit down, put my head down and work hard, I'll be rewarded. But that's not always the case. Kind of speak to that aspect, especially for the BIPOC population that you work with.
Yeah, so a lot of folks get told that, like, just do the right thing, do what you're supposed to do, and everything will work out for you. But life isn't always like that. For some people, it works out that way. But I work with clients from all backgrounds, but many of my clients have that intersectionality of having ADHD and being BIPOC. So that stands for Black, Indigenous, and persons of color, includes folks who are Latinx. The older phrase might have been like folks from minority backgrounds. And so there are roadblocks that they hit. You're often dealing with the challenge of maybe being the only one to be like upwardly mobile in your family or amongst the people you're from. You might enter a new domain where you encounter different types of discriminations or barriers. I've had a lot of folks who've said, like, yeah, they made it, but it gets lonely when you get into certain spaces and you don't see other folks of color, other folks who look like you there. And so sometimes that can be triggering. It can kind of make you feel like, am I supposed to be here? And then sometimes folks will tell you explicitly, you're not supposed to be here, or what are you doing here? Or even, more insidious, they won't say it directly, but there's some passive aggression that sometimes is rampant in the workplace, where people will make it known to you or let you feel that, like, you're not wanted or you're not supposed to be there. So it can be really challenging sometimes.
I can see that. And the options that you lay out to solve that are not easy. What are some options? So I'm in a career field where it's systematically going to, hold me back from achieving the highest level I can. What are some of the options you throw out there to these hardworking professionals who want to continue to grow their career?
Yeah, so I think there's no like clear path of options, right? But like in therapy, a lot of what we're doing is helping folks to recognize like where and when those barriers are existing, to kind of give voice and to give language to those things, which may not be happening in the spaces that they're in. I'm a big fan of like community as a big source of support. So, just by having a therapist that understands it, that's one component of community, but I always encourage people to become a part of or connect with other folks who are going through similar things, just so that you know that you're not alone, and so that you have like a sounding board to like bounce ideas off of, to think about like what advocacy can look like. To help you brainstorm ideas to get past some of those barriers that can be dealt with like individually. So I think part of it is just helping people to name and understand what's going on, because a lot of folks, if there's no name for it, you sometimes feel like, why do I feel so anxious? Why do I feel so depressed when nothing is really going on, but like the racial undercurrent of things is always going on, right? We're always hearing these stories in the news. Events are always happening, even outside of our workplaces, that remind us that like we occupy two sometimes different stratospheres, where you might be a successful person, but at any moment, you can be a victim of like harassment. Yeah, and then there's other things which I'm sure about, things like institutional wealth, and just, you can work really hard, but some folks have more privilege that comes in a financial way, where they have parents giving them, money or support. And so sometimes folks who like may have made it to the same spaces as their peers can find that they feel like it's still not good enough, or I still have so much further to go than other folks who have had much more financial privilege. So yeah, these things can show up in a lot of different ways.
I agree. 100% agree. So let's talk a little bit about your background. How was it for you growing up, and what were some things that set you up to be successful today?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Atlanta suburbs. And so I would say overall things were pretty good. I went to a predominantly Black school, lived in I don't know if DeKalb County is considered predominant, I guess so, but it's very Black, let's just say that. So I had the luxury of like really having that aspect of my identity affirmed very early on, getting to participate in Black History Bowls, having the ability to see Black teachers, Black success, having Black peers who really hit all ranges of the financial strata. And so I think that was a big foundational piece for me. And I think it's something that has like carried me throughout my career. And I was telling someone the other day that like, I kind of think about like racial and ethnic identity for me as kind of being that safe space. If we think about it in therapy language, it's kind of like that safe, secure attachment base that allows me to go out in the world and like interact with folks from all backgrounds, because I have folks like who share my identity, who know what it's like to be where I'm from. And I think like having that has been really, really important to me. And then I guess the other question is with regards to money. I think money is always something that I've been aware of, like as a child. And so like I was thinking about it, and I was like, I always had kind of like little entrepreneurial leanings, right? So like always, whenever it came to selling stuff for school, that was me selling Girl Scout cookies, selling the candy, selling unauthorized candy sales, right? Like, so I think I always had a mind for like money and thinking about like how to serve people and how to make money at the same time. And so, going further on, that my educate and I think both of my parents have kind of like always been involved in like my mom sold Avon, and like my dad had phases where he was an entrepreneur. So I think for me, like watching my mom like she had a formal job as well, or a full-time job as well, but always being involved in sort of the process of like sales and thinking about things that way probably did shape me like very early on.
You rarely see the combination of, business, desire, and also therapy. When did the concept of therapy enter into your life?
Yeah, so the business desire, it didn't feel like a desire. It just felt like something that just happened or I just like did. But therapy came much later. So I went to grad school. And when I went to grad school, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to be a therapist. I was planning to be a researcher. I was interested in looking at racial and ethnic disparities in terms of health. And the program I went to had clinical and community psychology. And so I was like, okay. And I had a great advisor, and he was like, yeah, you could just see what you want to do and go from there. And so I think I was very strategic, and I was like, well, clinical is the harder track. So like, I feel like you can't add that on later because it has more requirements. So I was like, let me start off being clinical and see what happens. And so I did some not internships, I did some practicum where you see clients. And I was like, okay, I'm good at this. So like, I'm just going to keep going. And like, that really was what happened. Like, I just kept going, kept doing clinical rotations, went on a clinical internship, went into a job, decided, I needed something with more flexibility, left, and then went into group practice. Stayed there for a nice amount of time and then decided I wanted to go solo. And so, yeah, the therapy part came much later.
Right. Now, one of the biggest decisions young people make is which college they go to. What was your decision process on selecting the college for you?
Yeah, it's really interesting because neither of my parents went to like a 4-year university. So I didn't really have anyone sort of buzzing in my ear about like go here or go there or do that. So I just applied to schools that seemed like good schools. And one of those schools was Emory in Atlanta, and I got accepted. And I went for they had a diversity weekend called Essence of Emory, where they invited all students, I guess Black and Brown students, to kind of be on campus for a weekend and see what it was like. It was a really great experience. I met folks who I'm still very good friends with today. And so for me, that solidified, okay, that's where I'm going. So
I'm also from DeKalb County, and first of all, the candy person on the school bus was priceless in the economy of the school system. But you're moving from, DeKalb County, where there is a lot of minorities doing well, and you're transitioning to Emory. How did you deal with that transition? What are some of the things that you were involved in that really helped you out?
yeah, it's funny because Emory is right down the street, but it felt like a whole world away. And so I was a joiner. Like I didn't really realize this until I like look back at it, but like I was super sociable, super friendly, and I just would do anything there was an opportunity to do. So I think I was at Emory at a really great time when they had a lot of diversity programs and diversity initiatives to help students adjust and acclimate, and I did all of those things. Emory also had a lot of things on campus to like help students get engaged. And so I did those things as well. So I think for me, again, like finding communities of folks to connect with, and really just getting involved. And the more you get involved and the more you talk to people, the more you find out about other things that are available. So, I mean, I did so many things while I was on campus. And I think that is really what helped to make it a good experience. And I think for me is the time in my life where I really learned to kind of have be a little bit more bicultural because, I grew up in a fairly homogenous neighborhood, you could say, in terms of race and ethnicity. But Emory had folks from all around. And so that was really cool. So I was involved in a lot of things that were geared towards students of color and Black students. But then I would also do things like I studied abroad. I was an orientation leader at some point. So I think just really for me, it was like getting involved and taking advantage of opportunities. And then even opportunities to talk with like professors and folks on campus, like I just did, a little bit of everything while I was there.
So, for somebody who's thinking about doing some type of study abroad program, what are the benefits are you utilizing or reaping today from that experience?
Yeah, for me, it was really life-changing because I I think I had been out of the country a couple times on like very small trips, but I studied abroad in Spain. So there was the piece of like learning a new language and just living somewhere else, which I think really helped me see the world from a more global perspective. And then it also helped me, I guess, really have confidence in myself about my ability to do everything. I remember when I first got over there and I had to try to figure out how to call back home. And I remember being in the store, like trying to buy the calling card. And I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I did it and I called back home. And so I think moments like that sort of help you figure, it's like if I can figure this out, like, I can figure out almost anything. So, and then I think it's just a chance to um, just really learn about culture, right? And how culture is very specific to like environment, right? Because I had grown up in the US and then I'm in this completely different culture down to the language. And so I think for me, that started, to shape some ideas of, wow, like every place is so different and there's such different norms and foods and ways of being in the world.
So, when did you decide you wanted to become a doctor? I mean, that's a big task. It takes a lot of years. Um, when was that seed first planted, and how did you grow that seed to finally become a doctor?
Yeah, so I would say the seed was definitely planted at Emory. Again, I went in not knowing even exactly what major I want. I had some ideas. I was like, I can write, so maybe journalism, I don't know, like maybe psychology, because I had taken like a college level psych course in high school. And so as I started going to the different events, people were like, well, a doctorate is really a good thing to get in psychology. And I was like, okay, I have friends who are going to med school, so I'm sure I could be a doctor in psychology. And like, I think it was definitely like I had no clue what I was getting myself into. But because I was just thinking, oh, it's just gonna be like 4 years and like then I'll be done. Like, and I didn't have a clue of like how competitive and how long it was and like everything it involved. And so I just kind of launched into like, okay, here's what you need to do to get into a graduate program in psychology. And the first thing people said was do research. And it was interesting because I had applied for a research program. I think it was designed to help minority students get experience. It's through the University of Alabama in doing research in different countries. And so I had applied to the program and I was like, I really want to go do research in Jamaica. But I think because I was in Spain, like they picked up that I spoke Spanish, so they sent me to Guatemala. And so I don't know if that's why, but I ended up going to Guatemala. Like, I don't know if it was the summer right after I got back from Spain, but it wasn't too far after that.
Mhm.
And so I just started doing the requirements. And so I really enjoyed research in terms of like data collection and like engaging with people and hearing their stories and interviewing them. And it was another chance for me to think about the role of culture because even though they speak Spanish in Spain and Guatemala, they're two completely different countries and they have really, really different cultures. And so, yeah, I think, what was your question? I got lost.
What was planted the seeds for you to become a doctor, and how did you make that happen?
Yes, I think talking to faculty and kind of finding out like, okay, what are the pathways to move forward in psychology? And so that was sort of it. And then because I had a research experience, like, and then I did some more research experience, it made me a really good candidate for a PhD program. And so then I just applied to several, and I ended up making the decision to go to the University of Maryland, Baltimore County.
You're good. I do have to ask, your experience in Guatemala, like what did you take from that experience, whether you apply it to your personal life or apply it to your practice today, your experience in Guatemala?
Yeah, it's such a big question. I'm not good. It's fine. It's such a big question. What did I take from it? I think I took from it, from an academic perspective, we were studying the role of health and diet on hypertension, high blood pressure. And so for me, it got me to sort of thinking about like that connection between physical health and public health. And then because I already had the mental health piece, I was able to start just really thinking about the role of like health. And to like expand my definition of what health looked like and the factors that influence it, to recognize that it's just not they're not just individual determinants of health, but there are larger scale societal influences and even global influences on our health. So I think for me, probably career wise, what that did was put the foundation of like I definitely want to do work thinking about health in a different way, bringing in kind of a physical or medical components. And then also from a personal perspective, again, it just expanded my understanding of like culture. And, it's like, okay, this is a really different culture. I had a great time. I have a lifelong friend I met there. And so, also, I make really good guacamole now because of my time there. So that's another thing I got from it.
Well, hopefully you'll be able to share the recipe in the notes down below. So let's talk that a little bit more about that. Health, diet and mental health. We hear a lot, if you give a young child a lot of, sugary drinks, they may have troubles paying attention and that could cause a false diagnosis. Talk about, how we manage our health and how that directly relates to our mental health.
Yeah, so they're actually bi-directional if you think about it, because if your mental health is bad, especially, so I did my dissertation on depression, and it's one of the most common issues that comes in and when you're dealing with a therapy practice. So if you're depressed, you're not sleeping well, you might not be motivated to cook or to feed yourself. And so it's going to have a negative impact on your physical health. You often are not feeling motivated to exercise or move your body in ways that feel good to you. And so, like, having poor mental health can lead to poor physical health. But it goes the other way. Having poor physical health, especially when it comes to chronic illnesses, it can lead you to have worse mental health because you feel bad about the limitations of maybe what you used to be able to do versus what you can do now. And a lot of times there's this comparison that goes on when you're comparing yourself to other people. And so we find that I think in depression, there's definitely a strong, it goes both ways. But it can be the same thing in other things like ADHD, where like the things that you like, if you have ADHD, you have trouble like organizing and concentrating and focusing, and you might have a hard time getting an exercise routine or regimen together. Same thing with cooking. You might know that you need to like cook dinner, but that involves a lot of planning, a lot of thinking ahead. And so you just end up ordering DoorDash instead, right? And if that becomes a habit, that might have some impacts on your health. So yeah, they're really all connected.
Yeah, I really wish I bought more stock in DoorDash because I see that a lot with my clients. What do you, how do you help somebody who's in that state? I'm in a depressed state. I have ADHD and I don't have those healthy habits. How do you start to move that person down that path towards a more healthier life?
Yeah, well, sometimes I think it's getting the person to step back and think about how did you get here, right? Like, how did you get to this point where you're ordering DoorDash daily or several times a week? And sometimes once folks do that, there can be some empathy or some sympathy for like, man, I had a lot going on. Like work was really chaotic. I was just going, going, going. And not doing it from a place of blame or shame, but understanding like, your behavior has a reason. There's a reason why you're doing what you're doing, whether it's wise or not. There's something that's driving your behavior. So I kind of get people to step back and think about how did you get here? What was going on? Let's have some empathy for that, and then let's think about like what are your values? What are the things that matter to you? Where are you trying to go in your life? And if you get that at the forefront, you can start to organize like how does DoorDash behavior fit in with that? Right? So if you say like you're trying to save money, right? Like how much are you spending on DoorDash, right? Is that good for your budget, right? If you can afford it, that's one situation. If you can't, then like that might be the reason why we need to cut out. Are you too tired to cook? right? So then we might need to think about like what are some easy meals or some low-key things. So I get very granular with folks and kind of help people think strategically, like what can you do? What can you go like sit down and write out like 5 meals that you can make in less than an hour, right? Because when you sit down and think about it, how long does it take from the time you order a DoorDash meal until the DoorDash meal shows up, right? We're often talking about, and I know from experience, right? We're often talking about 35 minutes to like an hour, right? In that time, you could have made yourself a meal, but a lot of times what people are telling themselves is like, I don't have time to cook, right? And so is that the case really? Or is it that like you're too tired to cook? So like part of it is figuring out the why, what is driving your behavior, and then kind of helping support people in making different changes. So once you state something that you're working on, we're kind of checking in about that like on a weekly basis. Like, all right, how you doing? Like, are you on track with your goal? If you got off track, why? What can we do? How can we help you get back on the horse? So it's really kind of helping people commit to habits that they want to see change and then kind of chip away at it slowly and recognizing that there aren't any quick fixes for the most part. There are some things that like are faster fixes, but a lot of it is just like doing something consistently over time and like keep refining your skill set and keep working at the habit.
I like what you said. The issue is bidirectional. It has, first of all, it's mental health, and then there's also, bad habits. But if you layer on top of that a culture, especially for minorities, the problem gets more complicated. Whether it's I'm in a food desert, or everybody around me eats this type of way. Like, kind of speak to that aspect of also what we think of as fun is usually unhealthy at times. Staying up late, eating certain things, drinking certain things. So like, how do you deal with that aspect? So I may have some mental health issues. I may also grew up with bad habits, and I'm also in an area that encourages all those things. How do you think about that?
Yeah, so the first thing when you said I thought about it, I was like, if you live in a food desert, that means DoorDash is going to take even longer to get to you because it's further away. So, but that aside, I think part of it is helping folks understand the culture. So I do that all the time. I bring in elements of like, yeah, like when we think about like one thing I work with around folks a lot is screen time, right? And I'll often point out like, there are people who are getting paid to keep you tethered to the screen. That's someone's job to figure out how to make you stay attached to the screen. So don't feel bad if that's where your natural go-to is. But if you want to do something different, you may have to like really push yourself to go against the grain. So I think the same thing applies that like if everybody around you is doing something that doesn't fit with you, you have to make a decision about do you want to do what everyone else is doing, or are you ready to go against the grain? And so a lot of times I just normalize like this is what comes with going against the grain. Like everybody may not like your decisions. People may, you may the way that you relate to people may shift because if you used to go out with all of your friends to get junk food every weekend and now you're not doing that, like of course it's gonna have ruptures in those relationships, but you have to, people change over time, and the friendships that endure are those folks where you can find common ground. So it's sort of like, well, I can't go with you to get a 10-pack of fried wings and some fried rice because I'm trying to do things differently. Like, but we can hang out this way or we can do things this way. So I think it's understanding that like sometimes change and evolution means doing things around you that like other people aren't doing, but if you don't want to live the way that other people live, that's just a choice you have to make, or you have to recognize that like you and other people are different. Like they might eat that way and not have any problems at all, right? And your body's just wired differently. So I think it's helping my clients to recognize like what you need and what someone else needs is different. And so, you have to let them do their thing and you have to do what's best for you. And that can be really hard. Like it sounds easy to say that, but that's why you need help sometimes. And I think that's where the community comes in, because I think encouraging people to find a community of folks where people have the same mindset and are working on the same changes. And I'll tell people, if you can't find a community in real life, find one online, find a book, find a Facebook group, find an Instagram, someone you can follow. So I think it's really important to find people who have a similar mindset, regardless of if those people are physically around you or not.
Yeah, I think that's tough. I know I had a conversation. I had a friend. We met. Felt like we had a cool connection. And he's like, "Hey, let's go to a bar," and I was like, "Why not? Let's go meet at a coffee shop." And that was a long, awkward pause. And eventually he's like, "Okay, I'll try it out." But you have to challenge norms. So we talked about health. We talked about mental health. We talked about their surroundings, but you added an extra element: social media. So this sounds like a four-headed monster we're talking about here. Like, how is social media affected ADHD, affected somebody's perception of am I healthy or not, affected relationships? Like, what have you seen in your practice?
Wow, that's like a whole different podcast episode. But I'll try to sum it up. I think it's interesting because I went into private practice in 2015. And that's how I ended up adding my specialty of online dating, because so many clients were doing it, and a lot of the clients in my office had terrible time. And at that time, I was working in private practice, but I also was at a university. And so you'd see college students who were having their first dating experiences online through online dating. And I was like, man, this is terrible. These are some terrible experiences. So social media is really shaping. I mean, social media online dating sometimes do fall in completely different brackets. But it's the electronic ways of connecting and doing things that show up. And so like I have to have conversations with folks sometimes around like blocking people, or like stop looking at their Instagram, like y'all are done now. And those were conversations that people were not having 10 years before that, right? So it's completely changed how we relate and how we connect, and how we spend our free time, right? Back then, I would say like maybe 20 years ago, you didn't see the epidemic of people watching their children and then also being on their phone at the same time, or people walking into restaurants or stores and being on their phone. So technology use and social media has really changed how we relate to each other. But it's also changed like how because you were asking about like relationships, right? Like you never had to have issues around like, do I tag my partner in this? Or like they want to go public and I don't. Like, what does that mean, right? So technology has really, it's been fun to be at the forefront of that. As a technology user myself, to observe how it impacts things, and then to see these things reflected in my work with clients, and giving people a place to like name that dynamic and name that conversation around like what is happening based on the influence of technology in their life. So I don't think that fully, I feel like there's parts of your question I didn't answer, but yeah, it's a huge, huge, huge topic.
So we have to ask people watching this, they're going to ask, what are some tips you would give somebody to successfully date online?
Ooh.
Let's start for a young lady, and let's talk for a young man. Like, what are some of the things you're telling them to say, look out for this, don't do that? What are you thinking of?
Yeah, so I think a big piece, so I love this topic, right? I think a big piece is doing the work before you get online, and really thinking about, what are you looking for? What is your intention? What are you looking for in the app? And really get clear about that. Write it down for yourself so you have somewhere to come back and look. Am I looking for a lifelong partner? Am I looking for, as they like to say, a good time, but not a long time, right? Like really get clear on what it is that you're looking for on the app, and let that be your guiding principle, right? When you're on the apps, you get exposed to way more people than you would get exposed to in real life. And so I tell people, because of that, I personally think that people should be more discriminating. I think, if something doesn't feel right, if something doesn't feel comfortable, then it's okay to pass, right? If it's meant to be, you'll meet them in real life somewhere, right? So don't get too caught up in like, should I, should not. So then I say, write a good profile. But before writing a good profile, have a good picture, right? But get someone to take some pictures of you, some nice, clear pictures of you in a good light, of you doing things you enjoy, because that's going to be the person's first interaction with you. A picture really does mean, say 1,000 words when it comes to dating apps, right? Have someone look at your dating app, right? And so I think back in the day when I started helping folks around this, people were like, oh no, I don't want anybody to know I'm using a dating app. I'm like, everybody's using them now. So like most people, most of my clients, when they ask people to do that, friends are happy to do that, family are happy to do that. And so get somebody else to look at it and see if it reflects or resonates. If there's, if the writing looks terrible, like let them tell you that, right? But you really want it to try to capture like who you are. And then I think really like write, for the person that you're looking for, like, hey, this is what I'm interested in. I'm looking for that. Don't write for the person you're not looking for. So a lot of people who get jaded, if you're not doing this, don't send me a message or like, this person to the side that, like only message me, don't write that. Like it comes across as like bitter or whatever. So I tell people, write for the person that you're looking for. And then you can filter out the people that you don't want on your own. But like those messages are never going to stop the wrong people because the wrong people don't read. So they're always going to like come for you. No matter if you don't message me, if you're whatever, they're still going to message you, right? So write for the person that you're looking for, write for what you want. And then I think, there's a lot of stuff about the apps and like racial disparities. So if you're feeling like it's not the right app for you, like get off or, so just kind of, ask around. It's so regional, like what apps, people are on. So I think it's just sort of like if you meet people who are like, I met my partner online, first of all, ask them when. If it was like in the 90s or like 15 years ago, that's going to be useless. But if they met them in the last 5 years, then that might be an app that you could consider jumping on. And then you could ask them like, what did you do? Or what did you think it was about your app? But I think really the work is internally before you jump on the app. And don't get on the app when you're depressed. So people often push depressed people to get on dating apps. They're like, oh, get out there, meet someone new. Like it's like blood in the water for sharks. So you're not going to make the best decisions. Like, so get on the apps when you're in a good mental space where you can be decisive and make good choices for yourself. If you're in a bad space, then just take time to like do you and get yourself together. And don't listen to those friends who are like, oh, get back out there. Like, and then I often tell people dating apps may not need to be your only strategy. So do some offline, meeting people and putting yourself out there as well. Don't just rely on the apps because they can get addictive for some people. And it can feel like it's low ROI. So I have a lot of folks I know who are like, apps are terrible, I don't use them anymore. And I think that's totally fine. And I meet people routinely who are like, I met my husband on the app. So, your individual mileage may vary. So if it's just not for you or if it's just not working, get off, take a break. But I don't know if that answers your questions or if I need to give a little.
I want two more questions on that topic. What are some warning flags you have experienced, your clients experience on a dating app?
Oh, again, there's so many. But I think I encourage people to date from a place of mindfulness. So think about how the interaction is making you feel, right? Like, is the person making you upset? Do they make you feel like creeped out? Are you a little bit scared to go forward? If that's the case, then, find a nice way to say, you know what, this is not for me, or, thank you, but I need to go in a different direction. However you want to say that on a dating app, right? So I think it's important to have the exit strategy messages that you're going to use there, because a lot of people are nice. They don't like to tell people no. Some people just ghost people. Some people are like, I don't want to ghost people. So I think it's good to have your exit phrases of like, this is not for me, because you're going to have to use your exit phrases way more often than you're going to say like yes, you know. So yeah, think about how you feel interacting with the person. How does it feel? Is it unpleasant? If so, don't go forward. If it is, you know, be careful of people trying to move too fast, or trying to promise you the moon and the sun, right? Like, we just had like 2 lines of conversation. Now you want to take me out to Nobu, right? Like, that's suspicious, right? Or like, you know, watch out for people trying to speed you through the process or trying to cause you to connect, like feel more of a connection than is warranted for how long you've known them. And then the other piece is, gosh, it was something I was just gonna say. I forgot.
Last question on dating. Let's say you meet somebody online and you're ready to meet them in person.
Yeah.
It's a big step. How would you recommend somebody approach that? I mean, let's say they really want to find a serious partner. So this is not a, you know, what was the phrase? I'm here for a short time, not a long time.
Yeah.
They're looking for somebody serious and they want to be taken serious. How would you approach the first meetup?
Yeah, I might do like a call, right? Like, so I like it's some of the apps let you do like video calls, without having to give out your number, but you can always like, if you feel comfortable, like FaceTime or whatever medium, you know, where you could do a video call or you could do something on the phone. So I think talking to someone is kind of a nice way because a lot of times people will go from the apps, right, to like meeting in person. But that like talking to them on the phone can kind of help you get a vibe of like, all right, like how's the conversation going? Like it gives you another way to read them because part of what happens with communication and technology is we lose some of the nuance. And so when you're on the phone, that gives you much more of a like you have a voice, you can pick up pauses, starts and stops in conversation that can kind of help you decide like, okay, yeah, I feel really good about meeting this person. And then if you're looking for a serious relationship, it gives you a chance to kind of ask some in-depth questions to help you see like it didn't have to be like super in-depth, but just maybe like so part of the pre-work is thinking about what you want in your partner. Like when you envision the future with them, what are you guys doing? Like how will you spend your weekends? Like what is your, you know, if you do the year in review, like they do on some of the apps, like what did y'all do this past year? So then that can give you the opportunity to interview your potential partner and see like do they like some of the same things, do they have any like where are the shared interests. So I think that's what a phone call can get you, in a way that you can't necessarily get as fast over the chat. But you know, so yeah, I would just say like kind of try to figure out where the shared interests are, like what you guys both want to do and are looking forward to, and I think use that to help you plan a date, and kind of go from there.
So you recommend a video call before you meet in person
A
because
video or a phone. Some kind of call where you can get more than just a back and forth. So I just in the ethics training, one of the trainings I just did, they talk about asynchronous versus synchronous technology. So asynchronous is like email, where it's like I email you or I text you and then you respond where you want. Synchronous is where we're like this, where we're going back and forth in real time. So you want something like that where you're going back and forth in real time and just kind of having some kind of conversation. So yeah, something like that to just kind of help you get a deeper read on the person.
Gotcha. All right. So we slightly got off track, but I thought it was good. Thought it was good information. Let's talk about you going out on your own. So what prompted that? I know you said growing up, you know, you were selling candy. You know, those blow pops were big back in the day, right? What made you decide to go out on your own?
Yeah, so I was thinking about it, and I think this group cropped up that I was a part of when it was a stock market mastermind group. And it was me and some other folks in the Maryland area. And we decided to spend like weeks, I think it was like 3 months or like 12 weeks or something like that, learning about the stock market and how to invest. And so I think for me, it was very instrumental because it made me look at my money And I always was a money person, but there are times when I would fall off where I wouldn't really take it very seriously. And so it kind of forced me to kind of really look at things like, how much do I have investments? Like, what kind of salary do I need for certain things? And so I think I was kind of primed and starting to think about money and investing. And then we also did a section, and I was the person who presented about the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early. And I was like, it seems a little too strict for me, but I like the idea of like really setting myself up in a way where I could be doing well financially as I grow older. And so there were some folks in this group who were doing really well, like financially. And so I guess the little competitive streak came out, and I was like, man, I could be doing better than like I am, because I wasn't satisfied with like where I was. And so I think like that happened, and then like I think I had started to follow people. And so I did a financial coaching program for therapists who want to make more in their businesses. And so as I was running those numbers, so the person who runs the program is Tiffany McLean. And so as I was running those numbers, I was like, oh, like I'm not making what I need to make, which is, it's kind of like that second time the message comes up. And so, but this time I think there was a pathway or a route to like what that could look like or how I could get there. And so I think that was at the same time that like, I was thinking about making some moves physically. And I was like, you know what? I think it makes sense for me to go into practice for myself, because there have been pressure from various people. Like my mom was like, when are you going into private practice? I was like, leave me alone. I'm fine where I'm at. And so I think it like, and then I had also had peers who I had been at the group practice with who had launched their own practice. So it was sort of these things of like, okay, this is the next path. And so I was like, okay, I think I can do it. And so then I did it.
Let's talk about the dirty side of opening a business.
Mm.
How did you, decide your business name, maybe form your LLC? I'm not sure how you're incorporated. Find a tax accountant if you use one, accounting software. Like, what is that like? Because I think a lot of people don't experience that unless you go out on your own.
Yeah, so it's overwhelming. It was a lot to think about. And in some ways, like, it's not all done. Like, I was just like, you know what? I did some research, and there's folks who give their therapy practices like a name, and then there's folks who use their own name. And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna use my name. So that my business is My Name LLC. I already had an LLC from when I was working with the group practice. So that wasn't like a huge change. So I think I just kind of kept it. I can't remember when I made the LLC. Yeah, I think I had the LLC before I went solo. So I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna keep it as my name. If I come up with something later, I'll just do a DBA. And then the program I was with, I ended up getting an accountant. I had an accountant before, but I ended up shifting accountants. And so that was it was helpful the first time I got an accountant, because I was doing the bookkeeping myself, Excel spreadsheet, you know how that goes. But then as my practice grew, like the accounting fees grew, and I ended up needing more help. So I ended up switching accountants. And a lot of times I would get accountants from like the word of mouth. Actually, I think that was my third accountant. So from word of mouth, like other therapists who had accountants, and you just be like, who are you using, and then people will tell you. So that happened. Trying to think of what else. Yeah, but it was just a lot just to figure out the logistics, right? So I think being a part of communities with other therapists helped me to have people to bounce questions and ideas off of. And just to not feel alone in the struggle that like other people are trying to figure this out too, or kind of trying to sort this out. And it's a very big task. So, I just kind of did it bit by bit. And then it was thinking about like how I wanted to structure my business. So I ended up deciding, because I was like because I was licensed in 2 different states. I ended up deciding it would just be easier to not be paneled with insurances. And then it made sense for other reasons as well. So for me, that kind of created a whole nother pivot in terms of like, all right, marketing private pay is a little bit different from marketing insurance, and just kind of really learning about that and learning about like all the aspects of running a business, like creating a website and like eventually like hiring like a virtual assistant and like hiring someone to like work on the website. So it was a lot of new things that I launched myself into with like going into a solo practice. And so for me, I knew building a private practice would take time. A solo practice that didn't take insurance would take time. And so I contracted out with like a EAP that was like funded by one of those like venture capitalist tech startups. So it was nice because I got to see clients in a lot of states through that. Like I was paid pretty good for that. And then a lot of clients came in, and it kind of gave me the chance to try out like doing much more shorter term work, which I liked doing. But in my private practice, everyone I had had for the most part were long-term clients because I had been pretty much full for the most part for a little bit of time. So that piece was nice, kind of getting to work with like short-term stuff and just kind of exploring like what I wanted to do and what I wanted my solo practice to look like and how I wanted to look different than when I was a part of a group practice.
Gotcha. I talked to a lot of accountants, and seeing that you went through, I think you said 3 accountants, what makes an accountant a good accountant? And what makes an accountant worth firing?
It's a great question. I think for me, it was like the accountant before this one, not knowing what the costs were going to be. So like I'd file taxes one year and then I'd file it again, and then it would be like a dramatically different cost. And like I get an estimate, and I was like, what is this? Like this is so it's very frustrating. So I think not having transparency in terms of like what the cost is, or not even giving me like clear advice, like it was like just submit your receipts. And then one year I had a whole lot of receipts, and they like looked at them by hand and like charged me for that. I'm like, you could have just told me that, and like I would have put them in the system myself and saved myself the money. So I think for me, it's sort of like being really clear about like when things are going to change or what is different this year. And I think also like knowing how to work with like newer folks who are sort of new to working with accountant, because a lot of those were like learning years for me. I never had an accountant in my life, so I didn't know like exactly what I'm paying for, exactly what to expect, or even the range of like what are all of the things that you can do. And just because it's on your website doesn't mean I'm going to know, like, kind of taking the time to sit down and explain it and walk me through it. So, yeah, I think for me, like transparency and like breaking it, understanding like what it's like for a beginner who's never worked with an accountant before and who's in that business building phase. So, like, money and cost is really important, as opposed to like if you're working with corporate clients or people in the mid to high six figures, like the amounts they're spending on accounting are not so critical to their like business, to their like income.
You're 100% right. Private pay is different from being on a panel as far as how you gain clients. What have you seen be successful when gaining clients, bringing in revenue to your firm? What tactics are you using to promote your business?
Yeah, so it's interesting because there are the tactics that I intentionally use. So like being on therapist directories um and like networking. But the way, like I'm still a researcher, so I track everything, the why, the how. So I track like when people reach out to me, how did they find me? And then I ask them, and it's interesting because when you ask them, you get different answers. So like people say, I found you on the directory, but then they'll say, I put you into Google and then you came up on the directory. So then the question is, was it Google or was it the directory? Right. But I also think like when I network, it hasn't brought me a whole lot of clients directly. It does sometimes, but it brings me opportunities for visibility, and like it brings me opportunities I had never have any idea would turn into money. So like, I networked with one psychologist. I had just reached out to him because he was at the same EAP that I was, and he was also a psychologist who had the interjurisdictional thing. And then I ended up on his podcast, and like that has, given me a way to be visible and promote my brand. And then it's the visibility that's brought me clients. So it's funny because the thing that has brought me the most clients, I would say, um, Psychology Today has brought me a lot of clients, so I always tell therapists, have a great Psychology Today profile, write really good copy, and have a really good picture. That makes a difference. But Psychology Today doesn't work the same in every state. In every state, it's different. So it worked for me. It may not work for everybody else, but it's worked for me. But promoting my group for BIPOC clinicians with ADHD, which is not therapy. It is a consultation group for entrepreneurs who have ADHD. I myself have ADHD. It's part of why I get lost sometimes when I'm going through these answers. Promoting that group has actually brought me clients, but I think it's because it's forced me to be visible. So it's actually been easier to promote my practice than to promote the group. So I work a little bit harder at promoting the group. And so I put out content, and all that stuff just means that I'm more visible to people. And then people, talk about me to folks more, or potential clients find out about me that way. So yeah, so I think the keys are probably like visibility and like networking, but not expecting direct outcomes, just really being open to what can come from a networking relationship. Like you'll never know how it will impact you at some point down the line. And then also like, if you're going to be in directories, be strategic and pay attention to which directories bring you clients that actually become clients, and then really feeding that directory in terms of making sure it has a good that it's really well written, that it really speaks to clients. Because I worked a lot on making sure that my directory resonated with the folks who I serve in my practice. So yeah, that's a sort of a long, convoluted answer.
I think that's good. As a business owner, you usually don't have a 401k with an employer match. You are responsible for your retirement. So, how do you think about retiring as a business owner? Do you plan on ever retiring? Like, what do you think about putting something away for the time that you cannot work?
Yeah, so I'm a SEP. So that's where I'm at right now. At some point I may look into a solo 401k. But I'm just sort of like I could do more in terms of retirement. But I feel like I'm giving myself some grace because these 3 years I've been really focused on practice building. So it's sort of like the SEP is doing what it does, and I'll give it a whole bunch of juice soon. But yeah, so I do plan to retire. That was part of being in the stock market investing group. Like I kind of figured out, like, I don't even remember the numbers though, but I figured out how much I need to retire and like what it would take for me to get there. And if I'm enjoying working, I probably will like do a semi-retirement where I'll just do what I want to do when I'm retired instead of having to work, to support myself. But yeah, like the short answer is the goal is to retire. I think for me, it was something I really think about when I'm creating the price points that I'm at. Like, it's not just what I need to survive today. It's the fact that like I don't get any benefits. I fund my own benefits. And so I'm thinking about like what will sustain me into my older years. And I think that's really important for us to think about, especially like for PhDs. I went to school right after, right after I didn't take any breaks, right? And like I still feel like I'm late and I'm playing catch up. So just imagine like if you enter the field like later, right? Like you do have to play catch up for those years that you didn't work full time, or have a traditional job, or have a job with any benefits. And I guess it could go the other way, like where if you started your career and you did have benefits and you had a chance to put some money in, you have more compound interest to grow over time. But yeah, so I feel like, compared to folks who start working right out, I'm playing catch up.
Yeah, I see a lot of doctors feel that way when they're in their early 20s. They're people they went to college with. They're 2 years into their career, receiving bonuses and raises and employer matches. And there is a slight catch up feeling inside of them. So I think you're spot on with that. Any advice you would give somebody, any financial advice you would give somebody who wants to start their own practice? Anything that you've learned along the way?
I would say one of the things that benefited me was having some money saved up. So I did well when I was working with the group practice. So I had some cash to be able to bootstrap myself a little bit. And I think that that really made a big difference. So I would say if you can, if you're able to, save, stack some money, stack some cash. I was planning to buy a new car. That didn't happen. Still have my same old car. But the business is doing well. So I would say stack some cash. And I would say like learn as much as you can, network, watch all the videos on this channel, network with other people, connect with people who are doing well and ask them, how did they get there? Ask them this question, like, what advice do you have for someone like me? And their books, right? So I wouldn't have known this like 4 years ago, but there's so many private practice podcasts out there. There's books out there, like everything you want to know about how to build a practice. If you have the time, or if you have Audible or Libby or something, like listen and learn from folks and like come up with have someone help you come up with a game plan for how to do it and build community. Like private practice can be lonely, because you're by yourself. If you're with a group practice, maybe there are folks you see, but sometimes even when I was in the group practice, you don't get to see people because everybody's seeing clients and you're not always available at the same time. So I think it's really important to have community. I have lots of peers that I meet with on a regular basis virtually. And some folks occasionally in person. But yeah, I think it's like really important to save, to look at the numbers. Don't be afraid of the numbers. I meet so many people, especially when I'm running my ADHD group, who are like, oh, I haven't looked at that. I don't know how much, I'm like, look at the numbers, even if it's scary, cry, have your tears, and then like game plan, like, what am I going to do? So yeah, I would just say like, get comfortable with the numbers and have somebody else double check your numbers, and because you're probably underestimating how much money. I think that's the thing everyone says, you underestimate how much money it takes you to start a business.
That's true. True. So what is next for you? What do you see your business in the next 5, 10 years? What are you working on?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think for me, like I know clinically, like I'm going to usually be full most of the time. I'm not going to have a space for a lot of clients. So for me, it's thinking about how to expand out from a one-to-one model of like, all right, how can I serve larger amounts of people, whether that's partnering with corporations and helping folks start to understand how to support and work with neurodivergent employees, whether it's making other offerings to support clinicians. So like right now, I'm doing the BIPOC group for clinicians with ADHD that starts in September. But like I also added last year, I think, and this year, a BIPOC notes and networking thing. So for me, it's just thinking about like, what are some other ways to help clinicians connect and create community and like avoid burnout, because that's such a big thing in our field. So yeah, I think for me, it's just really expanding out beyond the like individual therapy and like trying to get out more into the community, to give more talks, to do some coaching, and to just really like share all the information that I've learned and I've been able to benefit from with everyone else out there.
Love it. Now, if somebody is listening to this and they're like, okay, I really need to talk to her, whether it's I'm starting to date online, whether I have ADHD and feeling that glass ceiling that I can't get above, like, what is the best way to reach out to you?
Website. www.drspllc.com. And then there's a page where they can go to like, I think it's like booking or something like that, or like there's a button you can click to schedule a consultation. So there, it'll walk you, like there'll be all the options for like how you can connect with me, around like what would be best. So the rates are on the website. All the offers that I have are on the website, whether it's for clinicians or um, whether it's for companies that want to get connected. You can also email my admin, admin at drllc.com, at drspllc.com. And she can help assist, or she can get me involved, and we can see if we can set something up. So yeah, the website I'll say is probably the best place to get started.
Well, thank you for joining us for another episode. This is Dr. Shauna Pollard. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
If this episode has inspired you to desire financial freedom while growing your practice, contact Diesel Wealth Management to begin your journey to financial peace in the description below.
The more I know, the more money I can make.